All right, we'll give one more minute here and then we'll jump into it. Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for joining us here today to learn more about the education and college inside track. Hopefully, many of you are either in the thick of it with your kids or planning for your future college attendees. I know it's something that's on many people's minds these days as it becomes more difficult, more complex to navigate. So, um, Cozy here has a bunch of information that we're going to cover today before we get started here. So I think we can just get started then, Cozy.
Yeah, that sounds
Ready?
good.
All right. So good afternoon, everybody. I'm Clark Schweitzer, Senior Wealth Advisor here at Diversified, and we are joined by Cozy Wittman. She is part of the College Inside Track program here, and she's helped many of our current clients navigate some of the complexities of the current college landscape here. And Cozy's background, a little bit for everyone, is she's the education partnership leader at College Inside Track. She has been a renowned speaker for a number of years here, offering education to families, training financial advisors like myself and our team here, tax professionals, high school counselors. So she's been around a few times with this situation, as she's also the mother of 5 children herself. So what she may have missed on the first four, she made up at the last one. But Cozy today is going to help clarify some misconceptions, some ideas, or really navigate some of the areas that she has found parents get hung up or stumble, kind of entering this phase of life with their children. So with that, I will turn it over to you, Cozy, and let you take us out from there.
That sounds great. Thanks, Clark. And thanks, everybody, for carving some time out of your day. I know everyone's lives are so busy, especially if you have a high schooler. And so let me get my screen up. Today, we're going to talk about strategies that will give you just a smarter college search. I want to open up the curtains a little bit wider so that you can see the behind the scenes stuff in the college landscape. If you're not familiar with College Inside Track, we've actually been helping families successfully navigate the college search, application, and acceptance process for 20 years. It's been a really long time and a great ride, and things have changed a lot in those 20 years. I've been here for half of them. Our goal when we work with families is to make sure that their students find right fit schools. And for us, fit means the right academic fit for the student, the right social fit for the student, because your students are also people on a college campus, not just students. And then the right financial fit. Our goal is to make sure that families identify the right price zone for them and then make sure that the schools that make it to the list fit in that zone. And one of the things that we just find to be true is when you get people really good information, it just naturally pushes down the stress level because you're making decisions based off fact, not the I'm not really sure, but let's do it this way kind of landscape. All right, so I love to kind of lay the groundwork here for what we're looking at. Our colleges continue to increase pricing. Duke just announced this week they're going up another kind of 5+% in the next year. They're going to be at $100,000 next year for 2027. And we see this kind of routinely on average. We see schools increasing their pricing anywhere from 5 to 13% in the last couple of years. So you can see prices associated with schools here. The thing that I want to point out at the bottom is these are the flagship schools of their state. So even our public institutions, when you look at your big dog university and your state, we are seeing many of these schools now well over the $30,000 mark. And in some cases, I was just sharing with Sarah before we got started, University of Minnesota, I live in Minnesota, is going to hang at $40,000 next year. I was just looking up UVA for a family who lives in Virginia. UVA is $56,000 a year for residents. That is not non-resident pricing, it is resident pricing. And so one of the things that becomes really clear is that saving for college is just a good idea. So it's important that you partner with your advisor at Diversified and make sure that you're saving on the right track to help kind of reduce debt over time. Let's kick this off with a quiz. What percentage of students do you think transfer at least one time? And this, of course, is just a play along at home. You can answer for yourself. Do you think this answer is 6%, 14%, 25, 38, or 42%?
I would say 25%. As a transferee myself, once upon a time, I think it's probably or higher, maybe 38. I'm in between both.
Sounds good. Let's see if you're right. 38% is the number. Now, I bring this up for a very specific reason because it turns out that when you change schools, it actually increases the cost of the student's degree. So when a student goes from one public institution to another public institution, 4 year to 4 year, increases the cost by $14,000. So the total cost of the degree goes up by $14,000. And of the 38% who transferred schools once, almost half of those kids, 46% of those kids, end up making a poor choice yet again and having to go on to a third school. And when they do that, it increases the cost of their degree by $24,000. So it turns out that figuring out fit academically, socially, and financially is a really important part of keeping the price of college down. And even if you've saved well, I've yet to meet the family who wants to overpay for their college education. I forgot to mention, we are going to take questions, so feel free to drop questions in the Q&A feature. If you're unfamiliar with Zoom, you'll find that Q&A feature down in your toolbar. Just type those off. I'm going to stop here after we finish up the FAFSA information, and then I'll stop again a little bit later in the presentation. And don't be shy. Please throw your questions out. All right, I want to talk about financial aid to kick this off. And one of the things that I always try and do is break down the misperception of what colleges mean by financial aid, because the definition for colleges and what people tell me are two totally different things. So I meet a lot of families, I do a lot of consultation, and in that very first consultation, so many families will start the conversation by saying something like, well, we're not going to get any financial aid. And what they actually mean is they're not going to get any need-based aid. And they might be right. I find a lot of people are actually not correct in that assumption, but it's possible, right, that you won't qualify for need. There is a whole other bucket, though, separate and apart from need. And the way that you get it is also different than need. And that is the merit-based scholarship bucket. So these are scholarships that come from the college themselves for your student. When colleges talk about financial aid, they are including both of these things. So when you go out to a college website and it says the average student on our campus pays X, they are actually telling you the average student, not your student. And this is important because let's say you're correct and you won't qualify for need-based aid at that college, because every college determines their own need. But let's say it's true and you won't qualify for need. The average student on every campus is getting need-based aid because they take the kid who's paying the most and they take the kid who's paying the least and they average that out. So it's being influenced by need-based dollars. And so if it's true, then that number they're sharing with you has no relevance for you. It also doesn't guarantee that you're going to get the average amount of merit aid. Your kid might get more or your kid might get less. So the numbers the colleges share are not really relevant unless they're giving you their sticker price. But again, that may not be what you pay. And so it's really hard for families to figure out, like, what am I actually going to pay to send my student off to Quinnipiac, for instance? All right, so let's talk about need-based aid. There's a lot of misperception around this. There are two forms your family might bump into to determine whether or not you have need. And here's the thing I want to clear up is that need-based aid does not just come from the federal government. And the federal government's formula for need is really different than the college's formula for need. So the two forms that they use to determine need are the FAFSA, of course, But some schools, these are mostly highly selective, use something called the CSS profile. And by highly selective, I don't mean private, I mean highly selective. UNC Chapel Hill, University of Michigan, University of Virginia all use the CSS profile. These two forms kick out a number that is now referred to as the Student Aid Index, or your SAI. So when you fill out a FAFSA form, you get a report back. If you don't qualify for need at the federal level, it'll say you don't qualify for need. And a lot of people misperceive that to mean the die is cast, I'm all done. But it's not. They're just telling you you don't qualify at the federal level. And if you're working with an advisor at Diversified, you're not going to qualify for need. However, the colleges make their own determination of need. So when you fill out those forms, they use the Student Aid Index on their own campus to figure out if you have need on that campus. And when you get your report back, there will be a little number in the corner called the SAI, and it'll have a number behind it. It doesn't look like a dollar figure. There's no commas or dollar signs, but it is a dollar figure. So I want to share the formula of the FAFSA because there is some misperception that you can somehow hide assets and make yourself needier. And I want to kind of share with you why that doesn't usually end up working out. So there are two parties that have to include their information on the FAFSA form. Parents, of course, need to be included. Today, what we see is that your assets parents get assessed at 5.64%, but your income assessed at 47%. So what it's in essence saying is that we assume that 47% of your adjusted gross income is available to be used for college. Now, I can just about guarantee that most of you aren't planning to spend half of your income on, on college for your student. And if you have more than one kid, you're definitely not interested in that. At least we weren't at our house. But this is what the formula is. Now, if you have a 529 plan that you've been saving money in, good news, that gets assessed at this tiny 5.64%. And some people kind of crinkle up their nose and saying, "Ugh, we're being penalized for saving." You're actually not, because you've been saving in that 529 plan over time. The interest on that 529 plan has far surpassed this little tiny 5.64%. The other thing is, in the absence of savings, most people need to take out loans. The interest on those loans will also surpass this little tiny 5.64% assessment. So saving for college, good. It minimizes debt. Students also have to include their information, of course. It is a student's FAFSA. And so what we see, our students are assessed at 20%, their income at 50%. The good news about this is most students don't have enough of either of these to matter. Now, the one exception, and this is true for parents as well, on the asset side of the house, if you are the beneficiary of a trust, your percentage of that trust does need to be included in the FAFSA form. And so if your students are the beneficiaries of your trust as parents, you will need to include that, and that can really wrinkle up the thing. I'm not telling you to do anything different. I'm just letting you know that that will happen. Now, you might have a third party, grandparents, godparents, aunties, uncles, who want to help your student pay for college. This is good news because these folks don't get assessed on a FAFSA at all. They can gift at any degree they want to, and it never gets assessed on the FAFSA form. After this slide, I'm going to take questions. So if you have questions, please drop them in the Q&A. A few things that I want you to understand about the FAFSA. Most parents can't remove themselves from a FAFSA. The state of independent student is mostly reserved for adults going back to college. Most of the categories that make someone independent don't apply to 18-year-olds. If you have divorce as part of your family structure, only one parent is going to fill out the FAFSA form. And the way you determine that today is not based on custody. It is not based on who's claiming that student as a dependent. It is based on who is providing the bulk of financial support. And if you and your ex spouse provide 50-50 support financially, then you actually have to choose the household with the higher household income. Having multiple kids in college at the same time does not impact your need. And in fact, in some ways, it makes it worse. It means you're way less needy, if you will. The way it works is when you fill out student A's FAFSA form, your adjusted gross income will be assessed at 47%. And when you fill out student B's FAFSA form, your income will be assessed at 47%. So if you have two kids in college at the same time, your income is actually being assessed at 94%. Now, if you don't love that, I didn't love that. If you don't love that, write the people who represent you. Because guess what? Farmers and small business people did that, and they got a very bad change that rolled out in 2024 reversed. So if you have your own small business or you're a farmer, you do not need to include your assets or the value of your business. That was a change that rolled out in 2024. The outrage was loud and clear, and it got reversed in the big budget bill that passed last summer. So if you don't love bullet 3, get a hold of your representatives and make sure they understand that you don't love this. Just a few other things that you should know. One, don't include 529 plans for others' kids in your family. So if you have 3 kids and 3 529 plans, you're only going to include the 529 plan of the student you're actually filling out the FAFSA for. Don't include qualified retirement accounts or your home on your FAFSA form. So the assets that get assessed are anything but these. So you're not going to include these. Now, if you end up filling out a CSS profile, those actually do include, the CSS profile will include your retirement and your home. The one thing people should know about the FAFSA, I get a lot of families who are like, I don't see the point in filling out a FAFSA if I'm not going to qualify for need. The one thing I would say to you is one of the things that we just know to be true is that families who fill out their FAFSA form have students accepted at higher rates than families who do not fill out their FAFSA form. So fill out your FAFSA form. Here's the deal. At a lot of schools, it actually boosts your student's acceptance rate. So you're giving your student a hand up just by filling out this form. So make sure that you do it. And at some schools, this actually includes the school pitching in a little bit of extra scholarship dollars. FAFSA itself doesn't give anything. The FAFSA is a formula and a form. The FAFSA doesn't give you money. It doesn't give you a loan. The federal Department of Higher Education does that. The FAFSA is just a form. The colleges give you money and they use the FAFSA to determine your need. And then lastly, one of the things that you should know is that the FAFSA is the application for the federal student loan. So if you're hoping to take advantage of that low interest loan, and if loans are going to be part of the picture, highly recommend you start there. You must fill out your FAFSA. It is the application for that loan. All right, Clark, do we have any questions so far?
You may have answered it, but how does FAFSA change if you have 3 children in college?
Yeah, so again, each student will fill out their own form. So the FAFSA is not a family form, it is a student form. So when you fill out student A's, your income will be assessed at 47%, student B, 47%, and student C, 47%. So if you have 3 kids in college at the same time, the formula is assuming that you're going to spend well over 100% of your income on college. Of course, that's a ridiculous number. What it in essence means is if you don't qualify for need-based aid with 1 student in college, you are not going to qualify with 2 or 3 kids in college. By the way, that didn't always used to be the case. Prior to 2024, what would happen is if you had three kids in college at the same time, they would take that 47% assessment and divide it between your three kids. So families who had three kids in college at the same time often qualified for need when they didn't qualify with just one student in college. So that's how significant that change was, which is why, again, I would highly recommend you write the people who represent you. This is law, it has to be changed by law. Farmers and small business people got it done. You can too. So just write the people that represent you.
Another quick question, Cozy. So let's say mid filing for FAFSA or ready FAFSA, a parent loses a job. So the income for this year is drastically different than the prior year filing. How do you handle that? Is there an adjustment?
Yep. So this is a good question. The FAFSA form is actually looking at your income year 2 years prior to the FAFSA form you're filling out. So if you're filling out the 2026 FAFSA form, because you're going to have a student in fall, in school in fall, they're looking at your 2024 income year. Um, so they aren't actually even looking at this year, which is part of the challenge, right? So you lose your job and now I don't have as much income. There is an appeal process that you can start on the back side. So you've gotten your financial award. I would go back to the school and just say, hey, I actually lost my job. And I know you're looking at 2024 income year where, we had two incomes in our household, for instance. And now we only have one income. Now, some schools will look at that and go, oh gosh, I'm so sorry. Let's take a look. Provide me the paperwork that proves that that happened. And they'll actually adjust, they'll make a readjustment. Other schools, and I should tell you, public institutions are not really interested in adjusting financial awards. So other schools will look at that and say, gosh, we're so sorry that happened to you. We'll catch you when 2026 actually rolls around, which would be when your student is filling out the 2028 FAFSA. So some schools will take into account, some will not, but you lose nothing in the asking. I would ask. I will just tell you candidly, if you're looking at some of the big flagship universities, those guys almost never allow for appeals. All right, let's keep rolling. So I'm going to encourage you to start to transition the way that you think about college today, because the way that the schools price their product and accept students, candidly, these two things are closely linked together. The way that schools accept students and price their product is no longer based on being in state or out of state, public, private. And if that's how you're still thinking about colleges, you're kind of playing on the 1996 game board of let's go to college. I want you on the 2026 game board of let's go to college. So the way to think about schools today is they are either flexibly priced or inflexibly priced. And the reason I need you to think about it that way is because there are public, private, in-state, and out-of-state schools in both of these categories. So some schools will flex their pricing based on who the student is and what they need that year. And other schools don't flex their pricing because they have plenty of applicants. This is really supply and demand driven. I'm going to use my last three students. Clark mentioned we have 5 kids. Our first two were very non-traditional college searches, but our bottom three were very traditional. One of my students went to our flagship university. I live in Minnesota, so in our case, University of Minnesota. One of my kids went to a private school in another state, and one of my kids went to a public school in another state. When we look at those three schools, the least expensive of those three was the private school. It was $10,000 less a year than our flagship school. Next in line was the out-of-state state school. It was $8,000 less a year than our flagship university. So just in my own family, you can see this really well demonstrated. Flexible and inflexible are not good and bad, they just are. because your local flagship school might be inflexible, meaning, Sarah and I were talking about this right before. The public institutions just don't flex their pricing because at the end of the day, they would cry in their soup and say they don't have any money to give. Most of them have multi-billion-dollar endowments, but they don't spend it on your student. Um, and so what we see is they just don't really move off their pricing very far, right? So the University of Minnesota in the for the class of 2026 is going to be 40,000 a year. If you're the 4.0, 35 on your ACT, you might get three or $4,000 over there, but no one's getting the 10,000, 12,000, $15,000 awards, right? And those kids that get the full rides that everybody hears about, those are rare, rare students. So I just want to be really clear on that. The other thing I want people to know is that colleges today are your single largest source of scholarship dollars, not the internet, not private parties, right? I don't want people out on the internet looking for scholarship dollars. That will be a pure waste of your time. Your high school will have some good ideas on some local scholarships, and you 100% can apply to those. But where the actual money comes from that moves the needle on the price of college are the colleges themselves. So the way that you think about pricing for college today, so this is true for scholarship dollars, but it's also true for acceptance. So the way that you control the cost of college is by controlling the schools that make it to the list in the first place. If you put a bunch of schools on your list that are inflexible in their pricing and their price is outside of your price zone that you're comfortable in, you are going to be outside your price zone because those schools are not going to flex their pricing, right? So thinking a little bit about supply and demand, if they're a high brand school, everybody knows who they are. We call them sweatshirt schools, right? Those schools don't need to flex their pricing. They have plenty of demand in students, or excuse me, plenty of supply of students, and they're in high demand. Those schools don't need to flex their pricing. Other schools who don't have quite the marketing budgets those schools have, who may not spend as much time in March Madness as a Final Four contender, those schools need to bring more money to the table because they need to fill their freshman classes. College is very much Econ 101, very much Econ 101. So the way you control the cost of college is by building a list where the schools can get you to your price zone. Other influencers, though, of scholarship dollars include the decision your student makes in high school, and I'll talk about those here in a second, and then the way they tell their story. These three things are 100% responsible for the price you pay and whether or not your student can get in. So, what we're really talking about here is being a competitive applicant for the schools that your student's interested in. And I want to be clear about that because I'm not suggesting all kids need to be 4.0 kids. Not every kid can be a 4.0 kid. What I really am talking about is looking at schools where your student is a competitive applicant, right? So if they have a 3.2, I want them looking at schools where the average incoming GPA is a 3.2. That makes them competitive. So when we think about this, you want to look for schools where your student is in the top third of the incoming freshman class, which means you have to dig out some information on what the average freshman looks like at that college. And we're talking GPA and test score here. This is super important, not just for acceptance, but for scholarship dollars. And lastly, for success. Because it also turns out if your student is in the top third of the incoming freshman class, guess what? They have a 40% higher likelihood of graduating than if they're just skirting in the bottom third. They did this study across 700 schools in the US, and the numbers came out the same at every single school. Kids who entered in the top third of their freshman class were 40% more likely to graduate than the kids in the bottom third. Quality of activities over quantity. More is not better when it comes to the activities space. And we're going to talk more about that here in a couple slides. Be demographically interesting. This is pretty easy to do. Most of us cut ourselves off, right? We tell our kids, this was me, by the way, stay in the state, go to a state school. It turns out you are way more interesting in other parts of the country. The vast majority of kids go within 100 miles of their house to college. Think about that. Most of the kids, by the way, that we talk to and work with end up telling us, like, oh, they want to go far from home. But guess what? When push comes to shove, they don't go far, they stay close. So, being willing to go outside your region actually makes you way more interesting, increases likelihood of acceptance, increases likelihood of scholarship money. Demonstrated interest is the interaction between your student and a college. Most of the big dog universities don't care about this, the kind of 40,000 kids on campus schools. But everybody else is tracking this. Just like at your business, you might track your clients or prospective clients. Colleges track prospective students, and kids that they've heard from more often tend to get accepted at a higher rate and tend to get better scholarship dollars. Transcript rigor matters because colleges really want to bring students onto their campuses who are going to be successful. That's what they're looking for. And so demonstrating your ability to do collegiate level work in high school is a really good indicator of that. Now, your student does not need to be buried in dual credit or AP classes or IB classes, but having done some during their high school timeframe, if they can, is a good way to do that. And then we spend a ton of time on the students' essays and the applications. There's no question this increases likelihood of success from an acceptance perspective, but it also increases likelihood of stronger scholarship money. That personal statement, a really important part of the application process, and most kids get it wrong in terms of what they think the colleges want to hear about. All right, my second tip for you, understand early decision. I want to talk about early decision because it's widely misunderstood, its pros, its cons. It is a decision. So when you use early decision, the one thing I want students to know is you've committed. This is your commitment. This is where you're going. It is important because you do commit to that on the application itself. And because it is a decision, you want to use it strategically. You can only use this one time. And because that's true, I would encourage you to use it at schools who accept a larger percentage of their freshman class out of the early decision pool. Duke last year took 58% of their freshman class out of early decision candidates. So if you're going to use it someplace where it pretty significantly boosts your opportunity. You no longer have to restrict the total volume of applications, so you can apply to other schools early action or regular decision. You just can't use early decision more than one time. And then don't use it if you can't afford the school. If you apply early decision, you're putting all your eggs in a single basket and you're telling the school how much you love them. And so consequently, I don't want you to use early decision if you know in the back of your head that you guys cannot afford this school. Because guess what? When you use early decision, they are not going to bring money to the table for you. And your student spent a lot of time and a lot of energy because most of the schools that you'll use early decision with have a pretty extensive application process. There is nothing sadder in the spring of senior year than for you to get the financial award back from that school you used early decision for and look at your student and say, I know that you exerted so much energy into that application. I know you love this school, but we simply can't afford it. Make that decision on the front side. And if you can't afford the school sticker price, then don't apply early decision. Use early action or regular decision. All right. One of the things I want people to understand is that acceptance rates are continuing to drop at many of the schools around the country. So the pool of highly selective schools continues to grow. And it's primarily driven by two things. The first thing is the test optional landscape. A lot of kids think, like, oh, if I don't have to submit my test, but I have this crazy good GPA, I can maybe get in there. And the use of the Common Application. When I first started College Inside Track, the average number of applications a kid would send out was 19. Last year, that number was 43. That is a crazy number. Do not let your student apply to 43 schools. One, because you can't possibly put together the application you need for Duke or Columbia if you have 42 other applications to do. It is not increasing your odds by throwing out more applications, not to these schools. If your student makes up an entire list of schools that are 4% acceptance rates, guess what? They have a 4% shot at getting into those schools. They don't have four times however many they did, right? It's still 4%. So it's important to understand that. I also want to point out on this slide, it is not just private schools. Sometimes people just call it the Ivies, right? Those are 8 schools. There are a whole bunch of schools that are not Ivy League that have low acceptance rates. Use Chicago, for instance, but also public institutions. University of Michigan, UVA, University of Texas. This University of Texas number is if you are a non-resident. One of the things many states are starting to do is say, if you're in the top 5%, 10% of your class, you have an auto accept into our public institutions. That significantly changes the opportunity for non-residents. So what we're seeing is more and more states doing that, and consequently, it makes it harder for kids to go off to those big public universities in other states. The other thing I want you to pay attention to here is the average incoming GPA, and you can see that a lot of these schools are accepting weighted GPAs. Now, and I'll take questions after this slide. So if you have questions about some of the material we've just covered, feel free to drop it in, or the FAFSA if you just thought of a question. The good news is acceptance rates are rising at a whole bunch of schools in the country that just don't have quite the same brand recognition. And so when we look at these schools, these are all crazy good schools. Look at the average incoming GPA at George Washington, right? It's a very specific style of school. Your student has to want to be an urban student, right? But 396. So these are great schools. Here's what happens. Your kids focus on these numbers and they go, 87%, I'm not going there. They let everybody in. Nope. What they actually do is let a higher percentage of the many fewer applications that they get. The acceptance rate is driven by application volume, not rigor. Because look, again, 50%, 396. The other thing, Temple, 80% acceptance rate. Yes, their average incoming is a 359, but guess what? For their honors program, it's a 395. So the students, like I said, focus over here. I want you actually focusing over here to understand if it's going to be the right school for your student. The acceptance rate is driven by application volume. I just can't say that enough. So taking a look to see if your student's average incoming GPA rides along with the incoming average is a better way to understand if this is going to be the right place for your student. Clark.
Yes, two questions. First, I think this might be an easier one. How many schools do you typically recommend students apply for?
Yeah, great question. We recommend somewhere in the 6 to 10 range. Some kids have 5, some have 11 or 12, but I would never go beyond 12. Again, throwing more spaghetti at the wall just creates more confusion on the backside. I would encourage you to do really good sorting of whether the school fits your student before they apply, not after they've been accepted.
Yeah. And then if you do qualify for needs-based aid, would that be impacted by early decision application at all?
It can be, yeah, because you are in essence saying to the school, I love you so much. I'm coming no matter what. Right. And so they're assuming that you don't need any aid from them because you're doing it before you've seen any financial aid, right? Because it's an application and you won't see your financial award probably until January or February. So um, if you do qualify for need, you probably would not get it. Now, the one exception to that would be schools who are actually offering incentives to apply early decision. And we are seeing some schools do this. Here's a $25,000 scholarship if you apply early decision. Now, for schools like that, just make sure that the average scholarship might be lower than that because otherwise you're leaving money on the table again, right? They aren't going to give you more than that $25,000. And so, in some ways, one of the things we talk about with our families is it even worth it to apply early decision? At some schools, it's just not.
And I missed it because I don't know if it was picking it up when you said, most students focus on one area. Is it the school versus the GPA or vice versa?
Yeah, so most kids are focusing on the average, or excuse me, the acceptance rate of the school, right? So they think a school can't be rigorous if it has an 80% acceptance rate. And I think Michigan and Michigan State are our greatest examples here, right?
Mhm.
Michigan State, great school, 88% acceptance rate. If you remember, University of Michigan had a 17% acceptance rate. I don't think you're going to get a way less great education going to Michigan State over Michigan. The average incoming GPA at Michigan State is a 3.82. That's higher than most flagship universities. And University of Michigan was a 3.9. So it's not like there's some giant difference, right, between those two schools educationally, but there is in branding, which is what changes the mark. And kids look at this number and go, 88%, criminies, they let everybody walk in that place, and that's what stalls them out instead of focusing on, is this going to be the right rigor level for me? And if I've got a 3.7 and I'm applying to Michigan State, that might actually mean I might not get in, right? So that's kind of how to think about that. All right, tip three, acceptance is more than grades and test scores, especially if you want to focus on some of those big brand schools. And I want to be clear, I'm not suggesting you not put any of the selective schools on your list if your student's interested in that and if they can be a viable candidate for that style of school. I'm just suggesting that you balance your list for risk. So if your student wants to look at some of those more selective schools, um, the first thing you need to know is that your student is not going to get money for being smart and interesting. These schools do not give away merit money. They just don't. They don't need to. They have plenty of applicants. The other thing you need to know is your student has to be more than smart. It's not enough today to be the, 4.8 with the 36 or the, 1580 on your SAT. You have to have done something extra that takes you outside the realm of the normal high school student. Passion projects, science-based projects. It could be arts-based projects. There are all kinds of community service, all kinds of things students can do that take them outside the world of the normal student. So, in other words, starting the knitting club at school is not enough here. You've got to do something that takes you above and beyond. Now, you might be joining us today and you're like, Cozy, my kid doesn't care about any of those schools. Great. What I want you to think about is what activities actually represent my student. I don't want kids doing things because it's going to look good on the college application. I want them doing things that tell their story. So if you don't have a student athlete, nobody cares. It's okay. They don't have to have a sport. That's probably the biggest myth out there. Everybody's got to have a sport. No, they don't. If you have the arts kid, no problem. Have their activities match who they are. They should tell their story and they don't need 15 of them. They just need to take their things they care about and go deeper, not wider. All right, here's a quiz for you. In 2002, there were 134 perfect ACTs. How many were there in 2022? Clark, do you want to guess on this one? 306, 585, 1257, or 2,542?
I'm gonna say 2,542.
You're right, spot on. Well done.
And I never took
Um,
it, so
yeah. It's interesting to note here that those were just the perfect ACTs. Those were not SATs, and they do not include the 35s, the 34s, the 33s, 32s, right? They don't include the 1580s. It's important to just understand how many smart kids are out there. So this is a nice segue into testing. It does matter. For whatever reason, people got the message after COVID that the schools don't care. False, they do. They care a great deal. There was a study that came out a few years ago that demonstrated even stronger information for the colleges that standardized test scores over GPAs are a stronger predictor of collegiate success. And so we see schools stepping back in. The SAT or the ACT, the schools don't care. It does not make any difference. It's not geographic anymore, right? If you're on the East Coast, you don't have to take the SAT. You don't. And it might not be the better test for your student. So getting a practice round of each of them would be important so that your student can determine which of those two tests is better for them. I mentioned schools are accepting students with a score to share at higher rates than students who didn't share at all. And so it's really important to get prep that fits your student. They're going to be competing against kids who have. And then you can make decisions about setting the test score after taking a couple of tests and you know for a fact you've got your best test score sitting on the table. Now, if you have the student for whom standardized testing is not their shiny moment, no big deal. You go back to the activities area, right? You're going to do something above and beyond, and that helps boost that application. I want to leave you with these thoughts. Search for success, not brand. At the end of the day, college is not a prize, right? It gets to be a prize for one day. Your kids record themselves, right, and put it out into the world where they got in. But then they have to go off and be successful. So I want it to actually be a match. We spent a lot of time talking today about the application process, how to think about that, about getting in, and about the financials. I want to talk about academic fit a little bit. All schools are not the same academic environment. So if you have a student where sitting in a chair and auditory learning is not their forte, of 5 kids, 2 of my kids fit in that category, right? They're not great auditory learners. They're much better hands-on learners. Think about that in the colleges or the programs that you look at. We want to set our kids up for success. And college is a different format than high school was. So I want to look for colleges that are going to teach like my student likes to learn. 80% of your kids are going to change their mind about their degree. So just plan for that. It's kind of a given here. So I don't want to just know what's plan A, but I want to know what might be plan B and C at this college so they don't become one of those transfer students boosting the cost of the degree. The other thing here is it's okay if your student doesn't know what they want. It's okay. They don't have to know. Most of I would say probably 40 to 50% of the kids we work with still don't really know what they want to do. We want to look for colleges then, though, they're going to help them with the process. Or at a minimum, not stand in their way when they change their mind, right? And make them start all over with their classes. And then college is sometimes the first time students fall down and scrape their academic knees. I think it's lovely if when you're touring schools, you can swing by student services, look for the tutoring center, the writing center, so that the students start to understand this is normal. It's normal to get a study group together and study with other kids. It's normal if you're the 4.0 kid to maybe need tutoring for the first time ever. It's normal. Normalize that. So many kids don't take advantage of this stuff, and their educational experience could be so much lighter if they did. Also, if you have a student who has a 504 or an IEP in high school, that can actually become something called a college accommodations plan in college. So a little bit about us, and then I'll take your last questions. college is an industry, just like you guys are experts in your industry, we're experts in the college industry. Our goal is to make sure that families understand what's coming their way and navigate it successfully. We do take people all the way through the process from what schools should be on the list to what do we ask during tutoring to how do I make this final decision and everything in between. When we work with families, that 38% transfer rate drops to less than 4%. We can accurately predict the pricing for your student on that campus, so you don't have to do guessing. But this is my favorite thing that we do. Of the 5 kids that we have, 4 are girls. They have all mastered the eyeball roll, and I never get to be the smartest person in the room. So, fortunately for us, we get to be a neutral third party for your family, getting you through the process with a little less stress. So here's the coolest thing I want to offer to do. My side of our company is all free. So I do family consultations. We're going to sit down and just chat college. You're going to bring your questions to the table and your student, by the way. And we're going to walk through academic, social, and financial fit. And from there, I can give you kind of next step strategies that you can use. If you want to understand whether or not you would qualify for NEED at any colleges around the country, I can do that predictor. And then I can help you understand the right path, need versus merit. And if you're interested in understanding what it means to be a viable candidate for some of those highly selective schools, we can talk through that as well. So feel free to use the QR code. If you have a sophomore or a junior, please take advantage of the family consultation. I meet between 300 and 400 families a year. I love that part of my job. It is bar none my favorite thing that I do. I could chat college all day, every day, and do. So feel free to take advantage of that. If you have a group of people you normally get together, like I said, my side of our business is free. I do these presentations at no charge. So if you have a, competition cheer team that gets together, feel free. I'd love to come and help you guys with that as well. Do the exact same presentation. You can get a copy of this deck. Just use the QR code. We're happy to send it out to you. And then lastly, do check out our Facebook page. We put out a ton of free content, and it's all sitting out there for you to just grab. So check it out. Clark, what questions do we have left?
So very, very insightful, Cozy. That was tremendous. Thank you very much. And as Cozy had mentioned, she's been doing this for just a little bit of time. So, for the cost of free, it would be great to just chat with her and see what kind of insight she can provide you. I guess one last question. As a father of 3 myself,
Mhm.
all under the age of 4, it might be a little early, but what is too early or kind of the right time? I know you said kind of sophomore, junior, but is there anything prior to that?
Yeah, for sure. I always tell people it depends on who your student is a little bit. If they are already getting a little anxious about high school course selection, for instance, because eighth graders will get the opportunity to choose kind of AP classes potentially for ninth grade, right? So if they're already starting to be anxious about like, I don't know what to choose and I don't know how to think about this and how do I know what I'm supposed to be doing at all? Let's get together and meet. If you have a ninth grader where they're like, oh my gosh, I got a B on this bio test, it's going to keep me out of college. Let's get together and meet. Because one of the things I can do is just kind of tamp down that energy and redirect it in areas that actually make sense. So if you have one of those kinds of kids, or often they had older siblings, so they're already thinking about this stuff, that's a good time to meet. Otherwise, I would say sophomore year is a beautiful time to start this conversation because you can do just kind of dip your toe in stuff. They don't need to be thinking about college every waking second, but we can plant some seeds that they should be thinking about.
Awesome. Appreciate it. This was again very, very helpful. Everyone, you will receive a recorded session here, so don't worry if you
Awesome.
missed anything. And then if you have any specific questions, feel free to reach out to us, Cozy, your advisor you work with here at Diversified, and we'll get you set up.
Awesome.
All
Thanks,
right.
Clark.
Thanks, Cozy. Take
You
care.
bet. Enjoy the day, everyone.